and let me welcome everybody to our webinar today. My name is Kathy Horwitz, and as Michael said, I am going to be presenting to you today a three-part webinar, and we're going to be starting with pivot tables. Pivot tables are a way of summarizing and analyzing large amounts of data. We will talk about how to create pivot tables and how to have your data ready for that structure creation. We'll be sorting and filtering the pivot tables, changing the pivot table calculation, and also showing the data in terms of percentages. We'll talk about how to refresh the data if the data in the original data source changes. We'll drill down to find the source of the data in a cell of a pivot table. And besides using filters, we'll also use slicers, a new and kind of nice way to filter the data in more of a visual sense, and we'll be formatting our pivot tables to better communicate the information. From there, we'll go into working with kind of the top 10 functions in Excel that I think everybody should be aware of. We'll look at, and possibly for some of you review, some statistical functions. We'll look at some logical functions like the if statement. We'll take a quick peek at VLOOKUP. We'll look at some date functions as well as some text functions. And then the third module in our series today is an introduction to macros with VBA. We will be recording Excel macros. We'll talk about the different kinds of macros that are available to you and how to record them. And as you record them, the steps that you record are translated into Visual Basic code. So we'll take a look at that code and find some places that we can do some edits. And you'll find that learning a little bit about the Visual Basic language is really quite easy because we know what we told the macro to do, and as such, we are then able to look at the code and kind of get a good idea of what we told the macro to do and what the corresponding steps are. I'm going to be presenting the webinar using Excel 2016. Other versions of Excel will contain the majority of the features we present. If there's anything that would not be in an older version of Excel, like 2010 perhaps, I'll let you know. We'll take a 10-minute break between each of our three segments, give you a chance to stretch a little bit. And before we get started with pivot tables, I know that some of you are with dual computers so that you're able to not only watch the webinar and listen, but able to participate and do some practice steps as well. So there are a folder of files that should have been sent to you, including a handout for pivot tables in PDF format. As we go through pivot tables, I'll give you some of those page numbers so that you can stay aware, and if you want to take any notes, you certainly can. The first file that we're going to be opening from that folder for our pivot table session is called trip sales. Trip sales. And so I'll give you a minute all to open that, and it should look like this. I'll give you just a minute to get that open. Trip sales. And as you're opening that up, let's go back to our discussion on pivot tables. So first of all, what is a pivot table? We're all here to learn about them today. Let's give a definition to it. A pivot table is an interactive table. Interactive meaning we can sort, we can filter, we can rearrange, we can do just about anything that you can do to normal data. The difference is that our data has already now been summarized into the pivot table. So it's a summarization and analyzation tool. Whether you have 100 rows of data or 100,000 rows of data, finding that exact data point that you're looking for is made much easier when you're working with pivot tables. Now, the data that we're going to be working with in this segment is representative of a travel agency that has offices in 4 different states across the Midwest of the United States. We're having a sales contest in order to incent our offices to sell airline tickets to specific European destinations. And we're also incenting the offices by providing commission for certain flights. let's take a quicker we were looking at our agenda, and now we're taking a look at our file. So our file trip sales that we'll be working with, we have the date that the airline ticket was purchased. We have who the sales agent is, what sales office that agent works in, the airline tickets that were purchased, here's the destination, the amount per ticket sold, the quantity of tickets sold, and then total sales multiplies quantity of tickets times price. And again, we paid commission on some of those tickets, not on all. We have 199 rows of data altogether, 200 plus, of course, our heading row. Let's get back to talking about the design of the pivot table. When you set up a pivot table, there are certain kind of regulations about setting up your database in the best possible format. One of those is that we don't want to have any blank columns in the data, and we don't want to have any blank rows in the data, because that separates the data into separate databases. Sure, you'll have blank cells, that's quite common, but no completely blank columns, no completely blank rows. You'll also want to utilize a heading row and make sure that heading row is the top row of the data. Whatever row the data starts in, the heading row should be the top row. And the way that Excel recognizes that as a heading row is based on how you format it. So format it just a little bit different than everything else, and then it will not be sorted or filtered in and amongst everything else. Now, what might we want to know about our data? So let's go back and take a quick look at the file. We have how many tickets were sold. We have total sales. So that might be the quantitative data that we want to understand. But how do we want to look at that? Do we want to look at it by what office sold those tickets? By where the destination was? By who sold them? Or when? Or any combination thereof. So perhaps we want to know how many tickets each salesperson sold. Or maybe what were the most popular destinations? How many tickets were sold per office? How many tickets were sold by to each destination? Or how many tickets did we receive commission on? If you've worked at all with Excel's subtotal tool on the data ribbon, you'll know that all of those questions can be satisfied by using the subtotal command, because we have one quantitative field and one descriptive field, and subtotal can do that. But if I wanted to know how many tickets were sold per salesperson, per office, to each destination that we paid commission on, well, folks, only a pivot table can do that.